Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of myNewsWrap, news from the SAP and Microsoft ecosystem and the world in between. Now, this week is again a bit of a special episode because I will stick to the usual agenda for the first part, and then I will focus on the, let's say, highlight of this week with respect to, let's say, conferences, namely Microsoft Ignite 2021, where I will walk through the book of news, focusing on topics that I think are really interesting when it comes to combine SAP and Microsoft, and that might really be adding value in the future, in the near and perhaps a bit not so near future, when it comes to bring both worlds together and add value for customers. So with having said that, let's start with the, let's say, classical agenda. And let's take a look what's new from the SAP world. There is one blog post by Walter Lemaire in the area of the business technology platform that describes how to split a multi-target application into a backend and a front-end part, making use of the managed app router. Point is usually you have those MTA packaging where you can put the backend and the front end together. That's kind of the easy way. But that also means that you stick to one deployment lifecycle for backend and frontend, and maybe that's not the case in your scenario. Then you have to split those things up into two containers or multi-target applications. And then you have kind of bring them together again so that they can interact with each other. And this blog post describes how to connect the front end and the back end when they are a part of different MTA projects. So yeah, quite helpful, I think, in that area, because that's kind of a typical scenario. Then let's switch to the area of the Cloud Application Programming Model. There was an update. As every month, you find the link to the updated release notes in the show notes. Yeah, I don't want to go into details. There's just one thing that I want to highlight, and that's this guided tours in the CAP samples, because that's, I think, really adding some value if you want to walk through the code. And it's using an extension of VS Code that's called Code Tour that allows you really to tour through the code step by step in a guided manner. And that can really help you with understanding all the bits and pieces, and in the same time having your hands and your eyes on the code. So highly appreciated that the team of CAP put that in. It's available for VS Code. I have no idea if it's available for Business Application Studio, and to be honest, I also do not care. Then one blog post that I missed last week. I simply forgot to put them in the show notes. That's a blog post by Tobias Hoffmann, who proposed a really interesting white paper, or whatever you want to call it, on a cloud-native architecture for SAP NetWeaver, kind of putting the NetWeaver and its components into a Kubernetes-based architecture. And what's really cool is that the NetWeaver architecture per se is not that far away to prevent that. But there, of course, there are some hurdles, but that would be really interesting, a really interesting read. Although I would not agree in each and every detail at the end of the blog with respect to bringing the pods together and mixing things, mixing workloads together. But very interesting, very nice stimulus with respect to where the journey might go to with the SAP NetWeaver and cloud-native architectures. Then there is another news from a very well-known contributor in the SAP community, Lars Wam, who brought out another new tool that I really like, and that's the ABAP Open API client generation in ABAP. It's available on GitHub. I think it's quite fresh, so it's not completely finished. But this one is really something that I have been hoping for, that SAP would deliver something like that. However, now community has delivered something like that. The idea is to create ABAP clients based on an open API specification. Now, when you think about scenarios where you want to call services outside of the NetWeaver and make use of them, then currently you have to do a lot of manual coding in order to do the HTTP client handling. And that's now, well, much easier if you have an open API specification of that interface, because this kind of boilerplate code is then generated for you. That's really something super cool. I think that also makes it much easier to bring all the worlds together and make use of some nice functionalities outside of the NetWeaver stack in the NetWeaver stack. So that's cool. Now, then next, let's switch to the Microsoft part of the house. Besides Microsoft Ignite, there have been some other news coming up. And finally, this month, it was time again for Azure Functions Live. So for the kind of monthly news session with product management, this time with Jeff Holland and Anthony Zhou, which was really a blast. Great what comes out. So two highlights are you can now peer to VPNs from Azure Functions. That's cool. So you can access private endpoints. And next one was, for me specifically, Node 14 support for Azure Functions. And there have also been a lot of other news all around .NET 5, what's coming there. And there will also be a blog post in the near future all about the roadmap of Azure Functions. I hope I can reference that one next week. And what makes this session extremely valuable, there have been tons of demos by Anthony about Azure Static Web Apps. And that was absolutely a blast. So it's incredible what the team around that feature of Azure has done. There is now also what's really amazing, CLI available that allows you to spin up your Azure Static Web app locally and connect that to an Azure function locally and bring those two things together, which was up to now only possible with a lot of manual tasks and course issues and so on and so forth. And that's now available from the CLI. So really cool. If you want to see all the demos, just go in. I think it's something around a minute 25 or 30 where all the demos start. Now, what's also one specific feature of this Azure Functions Live is that there is some curated link collection by Jeff on different highlights from the community. And there are really a few cool things in there: building Serverless CMS, best practices for graceful shutdown in Azure Functions. So definitely worth a read. And there is also one, from my perspective, very cool blog post referenced in here that I want to highlight. That's targeting a GitHub repo by Mark Drucker on durable function use cases. And there is one, I think, quite complex use case with respect to support notification with escalation in there and some long-running tasks and some sub-orchestration. So this example that's all available on GitHub really brings all the things around Azure Functions, especially Azure Durable Functions and durable entities that you can use. And what's really amazing is that you can really implement such a, I think, quite complex workflow with a lot of branches that you can for those who watch the video, see within the GitHub repo in the diagram that depicts the process. That's really cool that you can implement that in a code-based manner. Now, two more news from the Microsoft world that is on the list. One is Azure Friday had a session on Kida, on the autoscale tool that is developed by Microsoft. That also makes extremely sense for a combination with Azure Functions in a Kubernetes cluster, but also besides of that, if you want to scale your pods event-driven and not, let's say, load-driven. So that's cool. Then there is an announcement on a new podcast that's coming up. So one more on the list to watch, and that's all around Azure Cosmos DB. And yeah, that's, I think, really interesting because combination of functions and Cosmos DB, that's kind of also a thing that's quite natural. Okay, then I have one news from the world of SAP and Microsoft, so from the twilight zone in between where you bring both things together, and that's of course from the SAP on Azure video podcast that was published last week, and they had again Bartosz Jakowski as a guest. I have referenced, I think, quite some blogs of him in the past weeks. And that was a demo about making use of logic apps and making use of the form recognizer that is available within Azure in order to automate invoice processing. Yeah, that's really a very, very nice scenario, very realistic scenario. And if you want to see how things work and how easy it is to make this process work, then take a look at this video, as usual, available on the SAP on Azure channel. Now, with that, we have finished the first part of myNewsWrap for this Friday. So let's switch to the second special part, namely Microsoft Ignite, that took place this week from Tuesday to Thursday. As usual, there is a book of news. A lot of sessions are available on demand now. So you can still go into and dig into the sessions. There are quite some interesting sessions out there, quite some let's say, special shows, for example, around the new tiers and the giant VMs that are available within Azure. So also quite some stuff that might not be directly linked to application development, but is really interesting to see. Now, what really struck me with Microsoft Ignite was the inclusiveness of the sessions. So you had in real time, at least for the keynotes as far as I saw them, a sign language translator there. So for deaf people, great. You had the sessions in different languages. You had the sessions with different subtitles in different languages. So you could really mix up a lot of things. That's something that I have not seen in any conference so far to that degree of inclusiveness. So that's really something, kudos to Microsoft for enabling a lot of people to follow, to go along with such an event. So that's really something that's, I think, is just great. Now, I will now not go through the book of news in each and every detail, because then we will have a 2-3 hour session. I will focus on some topics that I think are really interesting for us living maybe in the world in between SAP and Microsoft, and want to combine things and want to really bring value in there. So the first thing that I want to highlight is news from the Azure AI area. First of all, Azure Cognitive Services, which is pre-trained AI functionality that you can use with different flavors. And there is one thing that's coming up that is semantic search capabilities that are available with Azure Cognitive Search. So it's not a keyword-based search, but semantics are taken into account in order to bring better search results. And now what's really interesting is there is a new SharePoint connector that allows you to interact with cognitive search with the SharePoint content. So this is now something that gets really interesting when you think about you have your SAP system and you may use SharePoint as your document store, and you want to search through your documents with a semantic search from an SAP application maybe. So there are quite some interesting scenarios that might come up there. And then there is also picking up the story of the SAP on Azure podcast, an update to the form recognizer. That's another flavor of the Azure Cognitive Services, which now also offers support for identification documents. So that's also something that's great, and invoice extraction. Plus 64 additional languages, so they are now supporting 73 languages. That's quite something, I would say. So that's really interesting what you can do here, and what options do you have if you combine that. And for example, Azure Cognitive Services is now a perfect candidate in conjunction with the Open API generation, because then you can call that service from above. So that's really interesting. Then we have data extraction languages. That's what we had. Then there is some news around Cosmos DB. Some more support for the Cosmos DB API for MongoDB. Some continuous backup and point-in-time recovery that's now available in preview. What's also quite important for those who are really implementing stuff on Azure, role-based access control is now available in preview. That's really interesting. And there is one thing that's opening up the door for a lot of scenarios is that Azure Synapse Link for Azure Cosmos DB is now GA. Now this allows you to do near real-time analytics on NoSQL data, including, as written here in the book of news, MongoDB. Now that's really interesting, because as the statement here says, and I think we heard that before from a different vendor, this really breaks down the barrier between an online transactional processing and an online analytical processing by linking together Azure Synapse Analytics with Azure Cosmos DB. And in contrast to another DB that is from a different vendor that also makes that promise, Cosmos DB is really cloud native right from the start. So that might make up really interesting scenarios when you think about implementing solutions on Azure. Now, what's next? There are also some news around the Dev ecosystem, Azure Dev ecosystem. We have Azure Communication Services. I think I mentioned them in one of the prior episodes. They can be seen as, from my perspective, as extracting the base functionality of Teams, like chat, like calls, video calls, out into dedicated services that you can then consume within your applications. So think about Fiori application that can also do video calls. You can use Azure Communication Services for that. And this became GA, or will become GA in the next few weeks, so in the near future. And will also be there will also be a preview that it's interoperable, difficult word, with Microsoft Teams. So that's really interesting. What's coming up there? I think that's also opening up a lot of options for let's say third-party applications in order to make use of that functionality without having to completely log into the area of Microsoft Teams at your customer side. So Then next, there is also some goodies for the Java world. As you might know, there is an Azure Spring Cloud feature that allows you to have some, let's say, managed environment around Spring Cloud. And there are now new features available, namely Managed Virtual Network and Autoscale that are GA, that really allow you now to super speed up your development on Spring Boot-based apps in the cloud. There is also a second feature that's available. I think that's down here. There are new solutions for running, let's say, legacy or vintage applications, so JE applications on Azure, which also enables you some kind of, let's say, migration of your on-prem world into the cloud. So that's also really interesting for folks who do Java. And I think, Java is also getting more attention at Microsoft now. Now, there is also a section that was, for me, when I first read it, quite opened space for misunderstanding. There is a developer velocity assessment tool and helping you to get more developer velocity in your company. So I will shortly jump to this section on the official web page, because I was thinking about, okay, now this is how managers can make developers develop faster. But that's not the idea. The basic idea is, how can you help developers to remove points of frictions and help developers to innovate? And what has the company to do in order to enable developers to do that? So it's completely the other way around. I don't know if I was the only one who misunderstood that when reading the headline, but that's really something that you should take a look at. And there is also a self-assessment down below somewhere that you can do in order to see where are you standing. That's really interesting, or sometimes maybe even a little bit frustrating. And there are two blog posts that accompany that developer topic. One is directly focusing on the developer velocity, so it's a bit more information around that topic that I would use if I want to dive deeper into that topic. So it's more information around that than the book of news brings you. And then there is also a blog post that I referenced by Donovan Brown about empowering every developer to innovate with Azure, which kind of gives you a bigger context around what Microsoft wants to do in order to enable developers from modernizing existing applications, but also from building new applications, developing in the cloud, and so on and so forth. So that also gives you kind of a wrap up of Ignite from a purely developer perspective. Then, what did I find else? Well, of course, I have to mention that the very first keynote was about that. It was heavily focusing on Azure Mixed Reality. I think the keynote, or the keynote that focused on that, was a bit over the top from my perspective. So it was I didn't fall in love too much with the content of that, but that's my opinion. So please watch it and make your own opinion on that. But I think there are three main announcements that have been made there around mixed reality. So first of all, Azure Remote Rendering is generally available, so that allows you to render really complex models that you would use in your mixed reality scenario in the cloud, and stream that to your devices. Of course, HoloLens is the first-class citizen there. That can really help you in some industry scenarios. There are also object anchors that are now available in preview that help you with placing your artificial objects, not hardwired within your 3D world, but making use of AI to kind of place them in a clever way. And last but not least, there is one very big announcement around a new mixed reality platform that kind of embraces all of that stuff and even more. That's called Microsoft Mesh. And that was heavily presented during this keynote. I think it's really food for the brain, what you can do with that, what options open up when you make use of that. And I think it also clearly shows where Microsoft is heading in the area of mixed reality. Very, very interesting. I think there are a lot of use cases, and I'm really curious what will come up in the future, making use of this Microsoft Mesh. Okay, then let's switch to a more not so fancy topic, namely Power Platform. There have also been some announcements. The first one is very, very interesting because Microsoft Power Automate Desktop will be available to Windows 10 users without any additional cost. So you can download and begin creating automated flows. That's quite a statement from my perspective. Then there is also some updates on Power BI Premium. Well, I think especially target then really power users of the tool with auto-scaling support, faster processing support, and such stuff. And that is one thing that I think really is great news and will push forward the Power Platform. And that's the announcement that there is the first low-code, whatever you think about the term, a programming language called Microsoft Power FX, which kind of origins in Excel programming. So if you can do Excel formulas, you can do Power FX, but you can also benefit from all the points that you have when you do real development. So that's interesting to see how this will evolve. Because currently low-code, no-code tools are heavily pushed. I mean, we had that in the SAP area with Room, with the acquisition of MacGyver. But this is now really a new way of how doing that to really make a programming language available that's targeting exactly those personas that work with those low-code tools. So that really brings that to a new level. Then one announcement that's more a strategic announcement, so this will not directly cover me as an application developer, at least not soon. That's news about Industry Cloud. So we heard a lot about Industry Cloud in the recent SAP events starting last year. But Microsoft is also doing quite some things about Industry Cloud, and I had that already within myNewsWrap. And now there is an update. What will come within this year with respect to industry clouds and which areas, branches, industries will be covered. So from finance to retail that we already have, I think. Then we have nonprofit, we have manufacturing, we have healthcare. So Microsoft is really pushing forward in that area, and it will be interesting to see if and if yes, how this would influence the interaction with SAP, because that's really they're really competitors in that area then, because that's exactly what SAP wants to do with their industry cloud. Now, if you want to have a deeper, let's say deeper marketing-ish insight into that topic, I can recommend a YouTube video on the topic that came out at the end of February. It's called What's Next for Industry, that summarizes the industry clouds in a more detailed way. It's a 20-minute video around the different industry clouds that will come and what's kind of contained in there, whom they're targeting, and all the information around that. I mean, it's not a technical video, it's more marketing, but it's quite interesting to see and quite nicely made. Then Microsoft Teams, there is one feature that I want to highlight that really is interesting when you think about combining again SAP with Microsoft, and that's a feature that was missed quite some time now. which is now available in private preview, unfortunately, and that's Microsoft Teams Connect, that allows you to build really private channels that allow you to interact with also customers outside of your company. Yeah, there are also a lot of news around hardware around Teams and what's coming new with respect to presentation areas. But yeah, that's not really really interesting for application development, at least not if you're not directly developing an application on top of Microsoft Teams. But this Teams Connect can really be interesting if you think about interacting with external customers. And now one last thingy around Microsoft Ignite that's kind of falls into the area of education. As I said before, you can still register yourself for learning journeys within the Ignite area. If you finish them, you get a voucher for a free certification. That's something that I would definitely do. I think that's running until the end of March, if I'm not mistaken. And there is also an announcement that was made that Microsoft Certifications renewal is now available for free on Microsoft Learn in order to help you to keep your technical skills up to date. So usually your certifications, I think they're running 2 years or 3 years, and then you have to renew them, and usually you have to pay for that. And that's now available for free. It was announced in December, and now it's reality. So that's something that is really great news for developers, for keeping your knowledge up to date, and brings down the barrier for us to also show this knowledge by keeping our certifications up to date. Now with that, that's all that I think is really prior one news from Microsoft Ignite. Of course, there are a lot of other news, so take a look into the book of news if you want to get a quick overview what happened there in the different areas. Quite interesting things coming up this year in the Microsoft area. Looking forward to them. Now with that, I am at the end of this episode for myNewsWrap. I hope I had some news for you, some interesting stuff that you can dive in, some stuff that you can read. And yeah, with that, I wish you a nice Friday, a nice weekend, and see you next time. Until then, bye.